Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to sift through those, complicated documents, the ones that can feel pretty overwhelming, and pull out the really crucial bits for you. Today, we're tackling something that, frankly, affects a lot of people, especially if you've navigated big career changes. We're talking about your rights, financial and legal, specifically around your pension when your employer goes through something major like a retrenchment. We've got a really solid set of sources. There's a detailed pension plan rulebook, plus some sharp legal takes, all zeroing in on questions from retrenched officers. So our goal today is pretty clear. We want to figure out the bank's exact legal duties. We're looking at RBC as the example here. When things like retrenchment happen, what actually happens with your pension? What rights do you really have? And what questions should the bank be answering? This is like your shortcut to getting informed on a complex but super relatable issue.
Absolutely. And our job is to really unpack the legal angles and maybe even point out some factual contradictions that pop up when an employer like RBC is handling pension funds while also managing these employment shifts. We want to make it crystal clear for you what's lawful, what maybe seems contradictory, and most importantly, what rights you, as someone who's been retrenched, might actually have. It's about getting clarity, really.
Okay, let's jump right in with the big one. The question I know is top of mind for so many folks who've been through this. All right, if I was retrenched, did the bank have the right to just give me my pension money in cash right then and there? Or were they supposed to hold on to it until I actually retired? That's a huge worry, right? Was what happened actually allowed?
Yeah, that's exactly the place to start. And the RBC Financial Caribbean Pension Fund Plan Rules, the 2016 version we're looking at, are actually pretty specific on this. You got to look at Rule 14. It's called termination of employment. The main thing, the decider, is how long you were in the plan, your pensionable service. So Rule 14.1, it says if you had less than 5 years of pensionable service, then basically you just get back any extra money you put in yourself, your voluntary contributions plus some interest. But, and this is key for most people in this situation, Rule 14.2 says if you had 5 years or more of pensionable service, you're entitled to something different. It's called a deferred pension. And that deferred pension, according to the rules, has to be paid out starting from your normal retirement date, which, for most plans, this one included, is usually age 60.
Okay, hang on. So let me make sure I've got this straight. If someone worked there, say, 7 years, had 7 years in the pension plan, Rule 14.2 means the bank couldn't just write them a check for the pension money when they were retrenched. They legally had to keep it.
That's exactly right, 100%. Our read of the legal analysis and the rulebook itself is really clear on this. If you hit that 5-year mark or more, the bank had no legal right to just pay out your whole accumulated pension in cash right when you were retrenched. What you were legally entitled to was to keep your pension inside the fund, and then start getting monthly payments when you hit your normal retirement age. Now, getting that money out early in cash, that's only possible under really specific conditions, mainly Rule 10, which deals with something called commutation. And even then, it needs you to specifically apply for it, and the trustees have to approve it, all within certain legal limits. It's definitely not something the bank can just decide to do on its own.
Right. Wow. Okay, this is where it gets really critical for anyone listening who might be in this exact spot. So what if the bank did do that? What if they did cash out the pension for someone with, say, 10 years of service, completely ignoring what Rule 14.2 says? What are the consequences of that?
Well, if that happened, the sources we looked at suggest it's potentially a major breach, not just like a paperwork error. It could be seen as a breach of fiduciary duty. That means the bank, as the pension administrator, has this really high legal and ethical duty to act only in your best interest. They're holding your money in trust. Doing something against the plan rules that hurts your benefit, that looks like a violation of that trust, that high standard of care they owe you. It might also be an unauthorized distribution of funds, and that can trigger some pretty nasty tax problems for you, the member, under Rule 22. So this raises a really important point for you listening. If this happened to you, you probably have a solid legal right to demand they put that deferred pension back, restore its value, or at least get compensation for any harm done, including maybe those tax hits from getting the money out too early and improperly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's pivot slightly to another really sharp question our listener raised. It feels subtle, but I think it's crucial. Is it illegal if the bank still has my pension after I was retrenched? We're moving from could they cash it out to is it okay they're still holding it? Where's the legal line there?
You nailed a really key point. And this is where a major legal contradiction often crops up. Let's break it down carefully. Scenario 1. You were lawfully retrenched by your actual employer, RBC. You had 5+ years of service. You didn't ask for an early payout. And your pension is still sitting in the fund as a deferred pension under Rule 14.2. In that specific case, yes, the bank is lawfully holding your pension until you reach retirement age. Perfectly legal. They're just doing their job as the custodian. But here's where it gets unlawful, or at least really inconsistent and legally shaky. What if you were told you were being retrenched by, say, Enterprise Services or some other entity that wasn't actually your legal employer, yet RBC, the bank itself, is still the one holding and managing your pension fund? Or just as problematic, what if RBC said, oh, you weren't our employee for termination purposes, maybe to avoid certain liabilities, but then they turn around and act like you are their employee when it comes to holding onto your pension? That's the core contradiction we're highlighting. The bank legally just cannot say, you're not our employee, so we're letting you go, and in the next breath say, but you are our employee, so we'll keep managing your pension. It just doesn't square legally. They can't have it both ways.
Right, that contradiction feels really central. And this is where the legal arguments, the proofs you mentioned, become super powerful for anyone retrenched, right? Our sources actually lay out specific proofs to back this up. This idea that the bank can't deny being your employer for dismissal, but act like your employer for pension purposes. Let's really walk through those 5 proofs. They seem like the bedrock here.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at them together, you see they build a really strong case against that contradictory stance. The first proof, it comes straight from the pension plan rules themselves, specifically Rule 14.2. Remember the wording. If a member ceases to be in the service of the employer and has completed at least 5 years of pensionable service, he shall be entitled to a deferred pension. See that phrase, the employer. The rule itself assumes the employer, which is supposed to be RBC here, is the entity acknowledging your service and responsible for that deferred pension. So if RBC turns around and says, actually, we weren't your employer when you left, then how can they logically or legally administer your pension rights under their own rule that requires that employer link? It's like an internal inconsistency.
Okay, that makes sense. Proof number 1 is the rule itself. What's the second one?
Second proof comes from Rule 19, Trustee Authority. This rule says, flat out, the employer shall appoint the trustees and may remove them at any time. This shows RBC has direct, ongoing control over the pension trust. They pick the trustees, they can fire the trustees. It shows a continuing, active fiduciary relationship. So the question becomes, if RBC claims you're not their employee anymore, why are they still exercising this direct control over your retirement funds through the trustees? Their actions here, managing the trust, kind of confirm their employer role, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it definitely points that way. Okay, so that's 2. What's the third proof?
Third, we bring in a legal concept called estoppel by conduct. It's a pretty standard principle in law. Think of it like this. If someone consistently acts a certain way towards you, like if the bank keeps managing your pension, sends you statements, maybe lists you in their pension records, they can't just suddenly deny that relationship exists when it becomes inconvenient for them, like during a dismissal argument. Their actions, their conduct basically stop them from denying the relationship. We see this in various cases. So if RBC is holding your pension, sending communications about it, they're effectively affirming an employment link for that purpose. They can't then deny it for the termination purpose. And estoppel says, no, you can't do that.
Interesting. Estoppel by conduct. Got it. Proof number 4.
Fourth is drawn from labor law, the industrial relationship doctrine, and specifically this idea of mutuality of obligation. Basically, employment is a two-way street, right? Obligations on both sides. So if the entity you thought was your employer continues to perform employer-like duties after you've supposedly been terminated, like calculating your pension service, administering the pension account, managing the funds then, under labor law principles, they're arguably still acting under a continuing employment obligation. They can't just sever the link for dismissal liability, but keep acting like the employer for benefits administration. Those ongoing actions demonstrate the relationship continues, in a way.
Okay, that makes sense too. The ongoing actions matter. And the 5th proof.
The 5th one is pretty straightforward, but really important. No documented transfer of pension rights to Enterprise Services. Our sources point out a crucial lack of evidence. There seems to be no formal documented amendment to the pension plan showing that this Enterprise Services entity or anyone else besides RBC ever legally took over as the employer or the administrator for your pension. So if Enterprise Services supposedly retrenched you, but good old RBC is still the one holding and managing your pension pot, then RBC doesn't really have the authority to do that unless they were actually your employer all along, maintaining that continuous legal connection. The burden's really on them to show a proper legal transfer happened. Without that proof, they're holding the pension while denying the employer role. Looks very shaky.
That is a seriously compelling set of arguments. Taken together, they paint a very clear picture for these retrenched officers. But, our listener had another very practical question. Are there actual legal cases from their own country, from Trinidad and Tobago, that back this up? Because local law, local court decisions, is often what really counts on the ground, right?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Because general legal principles are great, but how do they play out locally? And the answer is yes. The industrial court in Trinidad and Tobago has actually looked at situations that touch on these very principles quite a few times. These local cases are definitely key. Okay, first off, there's a case called Oilfields Workers Trade Union versus Super Industrial Services Ltd. From back in 2006. In that one, the court used something called the control test. They basically said, look, if an entity keeps exercising control over employment stuff like, say, paying your pension or managing your benefits, then that entity is still the employer for legal purposes, especially when it comes to things like potential wrongful dismissal claims. So holding on to your pension, that's a big indicator of control, suggesting they're still the employer.
Okay, the control test. That seems directly relevant. What else?
Then there's Transport and Industrial Workers Union versus Bata Trinidad and Tobago Ltd. From 1994. This case stressed that if a company claims redundancy, it has to be a genuine redundancy. Trying to sort of disguise the employment relationship while secretly keeping control over things like benefits, the court said that's improper, it's not okay. So again, it links managing benefits like pensions back to the real employer relationship. You can't just pretend it away.
Right, it has to be genuine. Makes sense. Any others?
Yep. Third, there's an excerpt from Lopez versus Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago Ltd. From around 1997. This was specifically about a pension plan issue. The court basically confirmed that unless the members of the pension plan clearly agree to a transfer or there's a proper legal amendment made to the plan rules, the responsibility for managing the pension stays with the original employer. This really reinforces that idea of continuity. The pension responsibility doesn't just vanish or jump to someone else without following the right steps, including, critically, letting you know.
So consent or proper legal changes are needed.
Gotcha. Fourth, there's National Union of Government and Federated Workers versus Caribbean Development Company, Ltd. In this one, the court stated pretty clearly that refusing to pay retirement benefits or even just failing to properly administer them when you have an obligation to do so is considered harsh, oppressive, and contrary to good industrial relations practice. This directly ties handling benefits correctly back to the employer's core duties. So if they're holding your pension, they're still under that obligation as your employer, according to this principle.
Harsh and oppressive.
Yeah.
Strong words from the court. Okay, and the fifth one?
The fifth one is a case, George versus Ford et al. While it involved a specific plans rule, Rule 7 in that case, the court's approach reflected what's pretty standard practice in TNT. If you have 5 or more years of service, you have a legally recognized right to a deferred pension. This just reinforces again that this deferred pension isn't just some optional thing, it's a legal entitlement that continues. So if the bank is holding that deferred pension for you, it's not just being nice, it's fulfilling a legal duty that points back to them being your employer.
Okay, so let me try and summarize that. These TNT cases, taken together, they basically say an organization that keeps managing your pension can't just turn around and say, oh, but we're not liable as your employer for your dismissal. Doing that is contradictory and likely unlawful under local law.
That's a perfect summary. Exactly. These cases collectively build a strong local legal foundation, showing that continuing to administer pension benefits creates a contradiction if you simultaneously try to disclaim being the employer. It gives those retrenched officers pretty solid ground to question the bank's position based on Trinidad and Tobago law itself.
Okay, wow. But just when you think it can't get more complicated, our listener pointed out something else, another potential snag. They mentioned their job actually started way back, like in 2000, with the Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, RBT&T. But the pension rule book we've been talking about this whole time, it's dated 2016, and it's under RBC Financial Caribbeans.
That feels like, well, a pretty significant gap, right? Is there a missing piece here, a missing legal connection between 2000 RBT&T and 2016 RBC Financial Caribbean? You are absolutely right to flag that. That's not just a small detail, it's potentially a huge issue. That gap between starting with Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago in 2000 and being subject to a 2016 RBC Financial Caribbean plan, it screams missing explanation. Our analysis agrees. There's a legal continuity question here that needs answering. Unless the bank can clearly, definitively prove 3 specific things, the whole basis for applying the 2016 rules to you might be flawed.
Okay, 3 things they need to prove. What are they?
First, they need to show proof of trust succession or merger resolution. They need formal legal documents, board resolutions, merger agreements, that sort of thing, showing that the original RBT&T pension plan from 2000 was properly legally merged into or replaced by this 2016 RBC plan. Or they need to prove that every member of that old plan, including you, was lawfully transferred into the new plan. And that means proper notification, legal paperwork, the whole 9 yards. If they can't produce that proof, then arguably your pension rights might still be governed by whatever rules were in place back with RBT&T, not these 2016 rules RBC is using now. That's a potential bombshell.
Wow. Okay. So proof of the merger or transfer is number one. What's second?
Second is employee consent or proper notice. Look, under Trinidad and Tobago law, especially employment law and trust law, you can't just make significant changes to someone's pension plan without telling them properly. Any major change, like who runs the trust, what the rules are, the plan structure generally requires advance notice. It often requires giving employees a chance to object, and sometimes even needs explicit written consent from each employee. So if you, the listener, never got any formal notice about your RBT&T pension being moved into this 2016 RBC plan, or you never consented, then the 2016 plan might not legally apply to you at all. Even if the bank's been acting like it does, your original rights might still hold.
Right. You have to be told and maybe even agree. That seems fundamental. And the third thing they need to prove.
Third is proving continuity of the employment identity. If RBT&T was just rebranded as RBC, or if it was legally absorbed or merged into RBC Canada or RBC Financial Caribbean, there has to be a clear legal paper trail. That trail needs to show that you are continuously employed by the same legal entity or its direct lawful successor the whole time. You can't just be shifted onto the books of a legally different company, even if the name sounds similar, and automatically be bound by their new pension plan from 2016. Without proof of that unbroken legal chain of employment identity connecting RBT&T to the entity running the 2016 plan, the whole argument that the 2016 rules govern your pension starts to look pretty weak.
Okay. This historical gap point feels massive for anyone who started before that 2016 plan came into effect. And our sources are clear on this. You, the listener, you actually have the right to demand specific documents to clear this up. This isn't just being nosy. It's about validating your fundamental pension rights. You can ask for the original RBT&T pension rules from when you started. You can ask for proof, actual legal documents showing any merger or transfer from RBT&T to RBC Financial Caribbean. And, importantly, you can ask for copies of any consent forms or notices they supposedly sent you about this transfer. The bank needs to provide answers here. Wow. What a journey we've taken today. Seriously. From that initial really jarring question about pension cash-outs, through the legal twists and turns of the bank holding pensions while maybe denying they were the employer, and now uncovering these potentially huge historical gaps in the pension plans themselves. It's been a deep dive, all right. It really drives home how vital it is to understand these, frankly, complex documents and the company structures behind them.
Especially for retrenched officers trying to make sense of a really challenging and often confusing time.
It really is fascinating, isn't it, how things that seem like small details, a date on a rule book, the exact name of the entity that signed your retrenchment letter, can potentially unravel a whole legal and financial situation for someone. It just highlights, I think, how incredibly important it is to demand transparency and accountability from big institutions, especially when it involves something as crucial as your long-term pension entitlements. These aren't just footnotes, they're your financial future, and they absolutely deserve careful scrutiny.
Absolutely. And this whole deep dive, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In this world where companies merge, rebrand, restructure all the time, how careful do we all need to be about tracking exactly who our legal employer is? And maybe even more critically, who is actually responsible for looking after our benefits, like our pensions? What questions might you have listening to this about the fine print in your own job agreements or benefit plans now? Something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us on another deep dive.